Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.
I know that noise, Neil. That's the unmistakable sound of photographer walking through snow. Is it? You're absolutely right. 2 points. Yes, this week the show is coming from Norway, or as we would call it on the show, of course, Norway land. It's about -7, -8. So if my words don't keep up with my thoughts, that's the reason why. It is a bit chilly, but actually it's a very different kind of cold. I know that when I walk in woodland in the UK, often you'll hear me say, I cannot feel my hands. But here it's much colder, but yeah, fine. It's a different kind of cold. All colds are not equal. So, well, let me get a picture before we start today's photo walk, which is a very special, they're all special, but this one's a very special photo walk today. I want to get a picture of the track ahead of me. Pop you in my pocket. I brought the X100V with me. I really should have brought something much wider. And I'm going to regret not bringing out my... and in particular not bringing out my X Pro 1 with my Samyang 12 millimeter, see what I mean? Trying to keep up with my thoughts, millimeter lens, because I really would have loved to have got some wider shots, but I need to be able to travel in the snow skiing with a camera, and frankly the X100 popped into a pocket perfect. So where are we? ISO 160, shutter speed 2/20th, let's go f5.6, so shutter speed 100th now, and there we go, another one of those. Beautiful. Let's rescue you from my pocket. So yes, Norway today, that's where we are. Things I'm sure you don't know about Norway, and if you do, I want you to be on my next pub quiz team at the Globe. Norway introduced salmon sushi to Japan. True, absolutely true. You can see polar bears in the wild, which is, well, would make me feel a little uncomfortable because I have walked into the middle of the forest here, but you have to go a lot further north to see a polar bear. Quick 360. Nope, not one polar bear. And the Danish Happiness Index, which is used to index the world, reports say that Norway is one of the happiest countries to live in. They are the funniest Scandic race, apparently, though their humour is a little bit strange. Or it's mainly aimed, it seems to be, at the Swedish. The Swedish have a pop at the Norwegians have a pop at the Swedish. Here's one I was told by my Vorm Chocolade. What does it say at the bottom of a Swedish swimming pool? No smoking allowed. If there were tumbleweed, you'd probably hear it. However, they are very friendly. Very, very good skiers. They actually get taught to ski, I think, before they're taught to walk in these parts. Even the pet dogs here, they seem able to ski. So it's a special place to take a photo walk. And clearly, I need a very special guest to be on it. And I can safely say, I think we found one. They say in life, don't meet your heroes, don't they? Fortunately, that doesn't extend to Zoom. Otherwise, I'd not be all the richer for meeting an incredibly important, well, historically important photographer who is likely responsible for inspiring thousands upon many more thousands of photographers across the globe. He's celebrated as the pioneer of colour photography, certainly on the streets at a time other photographers in the genre were saying, colour? Oh, that'll never catch on. He's published over 40 books. He's a Guggenheim Fellow. He was the only photographer to gain unrestricted access to Ground Zero after 9/11. And our conversation today at times turns exceptionally frank indeed, which is a nod, actually, towards Robert Frank, who first inspired this incredible photographer to take up photography. So yes, not perhaps one to play in front of Grandma today, but I did ask him at the end if I should leave certain bits in, and he said, yes, yeah, don't censor that bit, so I haven't. Who am I talking of? I know, Neil, I was there with the first clue. Joel Meyerowitz.
Today on the Photo Walk.
We all have the responsibility of being awakened to our potential, and it doesn't always come from inside. Sometimes somebody outside puts the key in your lock and just turns it enough for you to catch a glimpse of possibility.
Stories of life told by photographers, and in a world that seems a bit at odds with itself right now in the news, hopefully today can be an audible refuge. Just you and me making pictures together, finding inspiration from the large and small that we see through our eyepieces or back screens. And in between our visits to Joel Meyerowitz today, your letters. And I'll tell you what's coming up after I say a huge thank you to our friend and supporter, mpb.com. If, like many photographers, you're careful when it comes to considering what cameras and lenses and tripods, etc. that you need for making photographs, you may not have considered the route of buying used. Not only buying, but selling and even trading kit that you have now for the kits that you'd like to move into. mpb.com make it easy to do, and if you're in the US or the UK or Europe, it's an excellent way to trade in quality used kit online and join the sustainable and circular economy. Actually, the X100V that I'm using today and I used during the Photowalks is one I purchased through MPB myself, and it goes everywhere with me, as you know. Over the coming months, as a developing feature, we're asking you to ask the product specialist team at MPB questions to help you make your purchase decisions. And thank you to those who've joined in already with this in our social feeds and the mentions. Trevor Williams is a good friend of the show, and he said he'd start the ball rolling with this one. I enjoy shooting landscapes, but I'd like a higher resolution camera. I've been working with a 6D. Any thoughts? So from the team, Trevor, if you're happy to stick with Canon, which I sense you probably are, a logical upgrade could be a 5D4 with its 30 megapixel sensor. But if you want to double that megapixel count, perhaps an EOS 5D SR at a whopping 50 megapixels, which I would agree with MPB is probably a very underrated landscape camera. We certainly don't talk about it too much on this show. For buying and trading and selling and being part of that circular economy, go to mpb.com. And if you would like to send in a question for one of the product specialists, then send it to our studio at photographydaily.show address. Studio at photographydaily.show. A big and very hearty thank you to our patrons, and we'll talk more about the extra show that you have coming up this weekend later on. Right, what's in your letters today? Well, we talk unlikely projects and just getting started with them. We talk about a dog and long lockdown walks with a camera that's treated PTSD and possibly started a photography business. We're remembering fondly the British photojournalist Tom Stoddart, treating cruel thoughts with charitable ones. We hear about and this is a great story, the 10,000 nautical mile documentary project one of our friends made, and tried to help him with a physical voice he brought to that project. And we have a complaint, but it's not as it would seem, and I'm asking you if we could reach out together to help a special friend with an exhibition toward the end of the show. So, shall we walk then? Checklist out, stand by to tick figurative boxes. Coffee and Garibaldi's packed, if you have the latter in your country, it seems. Check. Cold-resistant socks, for me, absolutely essential. Check. Gloves, check. Walking trousers, check. Spare batteries, film and cards, check. Earbuds in, check. Lens caps off, check. Let's walk. As I say every week, this is a show where we, that's you and I, get a chance to spend some time together. Just you, just me, with our cameras. And park that thought, because you're going to need it in a moment. Thank you, Neil. Duly parked. And I'm aware that because we have Joel Meyerowitz on the show today, we may well have some listeners that have not joined us before. So it's a very different kind of podcast, where, as I say, we take our cameras out into it's often the wilds for me. It's usually woodland. I mean, today this is terrific because it's snowy woodland in Norway in a place called Golla. And so it's a bit unusual, but it's the same sort of thing. We it's time for us to just be alone with our cameras and our thoughts, and spend time doing that thing that we love, photography, which for many people has so many mental benefits. And we talk so often on the show about those kind of things. We have letters, we have a guest, of course, we have snippets of inspiration from former guests. So that's what the podcast is all about. And I'm incredibly proud and privileged to bring you the photo walk today from Norway. Despite the snow, as I said, it is a walk. I can't ski and do this. I mean, honestly, I do look. I think there's an archetypal British or English, certainly English skier, and I am that skier. My wife is fantastic. She shooshes down, shoosh, shoosh, in between things, shoosh, off-piste, shoosh, then appears from nowhere. Think, stop showing off. The kids, they can do 360s and actually ski backwards faster than I can ski forwards. And we celebrated, of course, Dad's inability to ski quite so well as everybody else by, of course, greasing my skis, which makes me go much faster than I probably would like to. I was reasonably happy with the brakes on. Ski, the word ski, comes from the Norwegian word skio, which literally translates into piece of wood. Skis have been around for centuries in this part of the world, and there's some evidence to suggest that they may have been found as far back as 4,500 BC, which is when mammoths walked the earth, which is a bit weird to think of, isn't it? But in a chicken and egg way, I wonder who originally discovered skiing, where they thought, I know what we'll do. We'll shove 2 bits of wood on our feet, at the bottom of our feet, and we'll descend this hill at 3 or 4 or 5 times the speed that we'd usually feel comfortable at. A sort of 3-in-1 gradient. Scream if you want to go faster. Let's delve into our mailbag, though, and start this week, which is rich with ideas and thoughts about photography, as ever. And, of course, as always, if you want to see the pictures that I reference, be sure to go to the actual show page, because you'll find everything there. Although I did notice that the Google Player does do a strange thing. It doesn't always hyperlink everything that I tell it to. So if you don't instantly find that, just go to photographydaily.show and then the latest episode, or this episode, and you'll find us. I'm starting with a letter today from somebody who writes to both titles that I've been involved with. This one and the Fuji flavour one, of course. And incidentally, I did mean to ask Joel about the X100F, which I've seen him reference, but I'll have to do that another time. Here's a letter from Paul Cashman, a surprising photo project. Oh, we like those. Hello, Neil. Having discovered Photography Daily around 12 months ago, you have a lot to answer for. Firstly, given it's just you and I on our photo walks, as you say, mine's actually a drive, but I thank you for such a professional broadcast for my ears alone. You make me feel that I've a good friend riding shotgun on my 2-hour commute driving from Norfolk to Essex and back. Yes, 4 hours a day. Quick question, could you possibly release my podcast at 5 a.m. on a Friday so I can hear your dulcets from the beginning of my journey rather than halfway down the A11? Thanks in anticipation. Well, I'll do my best, but I'm actually a bit beholden to the publisher, which means it comes down the line at 5:30 a.m. But I've sent in a special request for you. I've said my mate Paul would like it a little bit earlier. Is that possible, please? Another thing, he says, you're responsible for my purchasing of a Fuji X100V, which I now want to use at every opportunity, which is starting to aggravate Mrs. Cashman. Thirdly, this is a shopping list, Paul. I now wish to go on photographic walks every weekend, which annoys Mrs. Cashman, as I'm stopping every 2 minutes to frame another black and white picture. And finally, just a thought, may I suggest you don't keep this podcast for just you and me, but share it with the world. I think you may be onto something. Now, my heart, Neil, is pumping due to the fear factor of submitting a few pictures for your perusal. A first-timer, like many. And we love hearing from first-timers, sending pictures in, sending your pictures in, letting us know where you've been walking, what you're doing, what you're seeing, where you are in the world. It's taken over 2 recent walks through the Rosary Cemetery in Norwich. See? He said it was a an alternative project. Graves from the early 1800s through to the present day, some famous and some not so famous. Tombstones, graves, mausoleums, low afternoon light, overgrown bramble and ivy, and the atmosphere suitably moody for high contrast black and white photographs. Hope you like them. Have a great week from Paul Cashman. Paul, I absolutely love them. Fantastic. What a great study. And I know some people might say, well, that's a bit macabre, Paul and Neil. But no, I think as a project, I think you're onto something here. Andrea Gilpin, who came on our Photowalk retreat a couple of weeks ago in the Isle of Wight, we've been getting around the last few weeks, haven't we? She actually studies these incredibly important places. And when it comes to projects, as you're going to find out today, you never quite know, really, when something strikes you and you've found, quite by accident, a fantastic idea. You'll hear of one specifically later on. I mean, I've been planning, and I was going to say plotting, but it's it would be the right and the wrong thing to say all at the same time. My project for the summer, I'm really looking forward to starting. It's called Lost the Plot, which is all about the British eccentricity of allotment holding. And the growers that I'm going to go and talk to, and those that have had allotments for 30, 40, 50 years, those that are brand new at it. There is an eccentricity to some of those that work those plots. So I'm looking forward to that. Lost the Plot, very British story. But graveyards, they're fascinating places. The John Swanell film, which I think I've talked about before, the film that I've been making with the British portrait photographer John Swanell. I remember we finished, when we came to the end of the film, I said to John, how are we going to finish this? And we were discussing how it should end, and he said, I tell you what, Neil, he's a very softly spoken man, John Swanell, wonderful, glorious person. And he said, why don't we go and find my plot? And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean find your plot? He says, well, I've bought one at the famous Highgate Cemetery, which is the final resting place to the stars. There's poets and musicians. George Michael, of course, famously, bless him, is there. So yes, we went looking for John's plot. It took us quite a while. We had a rough idea where it was, but it was very overgrown since he bought it. I can't wait to release that film. It's been years it's been years coming, that film. It really has. Something called a pandemic rather got in the way. But in terms of being passionate about a project, let's take some inspiration from Helen Jones Florio, who, with her husband, talking of 9/11 pictures, Jason Florio, of course, talked to us on the podcast about that particular day and those photographs that he took. But with regard to Helen, she has this fantastic project all about, it's simply doors, African and Mediterranean doors. I'll link to her Instagram. I know you'll love it. Here's Helen talking about finding that thing, that photo project that may seem slightly left field to some, but it's a really intensely fascinating personal study that works in tandem, actually, with wider projects, as you're about to find out. Here's Helen.
This is something, it's mine, it's my passion. It really is a passion. I love it, and I never get bored. I've got thousands of doors. Mainly from Malta and Gambia, because that's where I've spent the most of my time over the last 10, 15 years. So it's going to be them. But then I might go to a little town in the States and they've got amazing old doors, it has become it's kind of running parallel with what we're doing, but it kind of fits it. Going back to stories behind doors, we've been photographing the victims in Gambia of the former regime, as you know, and I've started a series a couple of years ago, and it's something we'll do more of when we get back. We've been interviewing the people inside the houses, the victim and survivors, and but I've also been photographing their doors from the outside. So there's definitely a little story which I know, I was thinking about not asking people, but I do know those stories, and that they're part of that.
The voice of Helen Jones Florio, and I'll link to her Instagram account so you can see more of her work. In the background, you might be able to hear the piste basher. Can you hear that? Just I've wandered out towards the edge of the piste. I've gone off piste to get to the piste. It's the end of a day here, and it's really cold. I think it's -13 / -14. Cold, Neil? You know nothing about the word cold. I appreciate in some parts of the world it's much, much cooler. But yes, it's the end of a day. They're preparing the slopes for the skiers tomorrow, and I've taken a walk out to get some pictures, which I'll share on the show page, so you can see what I've been seeing as we've been doing the photo walk this week. Would you like some show news? Show news, Neil. We're always in for some show news. Well, we've got a new episode, a new weekly episode coming out soon. Not quite yet. I'm still recording it with those that are setting them, but it's likely to be a Wednesday edition. It may change, but I think it'll be a Wednesday edition. And it's called The Assignment. And of course, the more astute of you will recognise that I mentioned that really quite recently. I did a lot more thinking about it. I'd already spoken with a couple of photographers who are going to set assignments, street, landscape, all kinds of assignments. And if they're not your genre, fear not. The idea of that assignment show, and there'll only be short shows, is to set you an assignment that challenges you, that pushes you. So it's called The Assignment, and it'll be coming out soon. Right, here's a letter from Adam Hansen. Hi Neil, I'm Adam from Colorado, or as you know it, of course, Colorado land. My friend Madison Thorne encouraged me to write in after she was on your show with the At-Risk Humans project. Yes, an amazing project. And in case you haven't heard that episode, and yes, I'll link to it in the show notes on the show page today, which you can link to through the podcast player app. This was the episode where Nashville-based Madison had struggled with the reaction people in a COVID rally were displaying, where somebody held aloft a sign that said, sacrifice the weak for those not so at risk or obvious risk from the virus, so that they could return to work and, I suppose, normal life. Madison, though, is one of those millions of Americans you could say that placard was aimed toward, or if you will, against, as she is type 1 diabetic. So she made this incredible photo project called At-Risk Humans. Portraits of the most incredible people, everyday people, if you'll pardon the expression, who would be considered at risk. So that's the background of this incredible story, and the pictures she made, the portraits she made. I think, along with the interviews that she held with each of her subjects, is a pretty potent piece of work. That's the story. Adam continues, I'm pretty sure photography has saved my life, as it helps me get out of my head and physically my apartment. I have depression and anxiety as a result of PTSD. It's been mentally crippling, yet 3 things have made a real difference in my life. Photography, my dog Ghost, and my friend Katie. And when COVID arrived, I'd just moved from St. Louis to Denver. This plague made me jobless, which only compounded my state, living on the couch. But then the CDC said to walk outside, to get outside. So I took my camera and my dog, and we started walking 17 to 30 miles sometimes in a day. My dog was my only friend at the time in Denver and became my focus, literally, as I tried to figure out this photography thing. Now, Ghost is a large dog. You could say that again. 155 pounds and 6 feet on his hind legs. And he can walk pretty much forever. And now we've added others to our adventures. Katie, who travels with us both to the mountains, which are so accessible to us being in Denver. Katie's helped me realise that I can work with people and not just animals and landscapes. So now here I am, a year later, working at a retailer where dogs come and go. We talk and customers ask about my dog, Ghost, and I point them at my Instagram. I've been asked to take some pictures of customers' dogs, and it seems they even want to pay me for it. So now I'm starting to think I can combine my loves of photography and dogs. How amazing is that? There is someone else in this story, though, who is so important, and that is Madison Thorne. She is a saint, as during this strange time in all our lives, she's kept encouraging me and suggesting edits to make my pictures stronger. And it still happens on a weekly basis, where I send her one of 24 pictures that I've liked to see where I can go with them. If Neil, you read any of this out, please let it be this paragraph, because Madison has helped me push through my days of doubt and my constant imposter syndrome. Thank you, Neil, as well, for being on my walks with me. Well, thank you, Adam. Thank you so much for sending this mail in. And well, as you've gathered, I've read more than just that single paragraph. I wanted to tell your story, because that's what this show's about. Hearing your stories, telling your stories, talking about your photographs, hearing about your incredible photographic adventures. And as to where you've come from and where you are now, of course, I'm not sure what's happening with your PTSD. I know that can be a process that perhaps you'll be working on for a while to come. But the pictures you sent in and shared, wonderful. And of course, I'll put those on the show page. I love the one of you looking out to the most incredible lake, bordered by these imposing mountains, with your wonderful dog Ghost, looking like he's sharing the view, looking out with you saying, "Ooh, that looks good, doesn't it? Yeah, I think it does. Shall we stay a bit longer? Why not? Let's take a photograph." And of course, the pictures of you and Katie with Ghost as well. You'll see them all on the show page. And I mustn't forget the Insta. Yes, your Instagram. I'll link to that as well, because that's part of your story now, isn't it? That those that you meet in you didn't tell me what your retail experience is. It sounds like it's a very dog-friendly retail experience. Maybe it is something to do with animals. I don't know, but I'll share that as well. Right? Shall we have? We should have some inspiration. And look, there's only one place to go for inspiration, having talked about Madison Thorne's episode and her story just a moment ago. The person that held up that placard that said sacrifice the weak, dreadful placard. Toward the end, it occurred to me to ask a question of Madison as my interview with her closed. And the question I asked was, had she thought about the lady who held up that sign saying sacrifice the weak? And if she met her, what might she say to her?
I thought about this a lot, and if I could be face to face with them, and it's been almost 2 years since they held that sign, I would ask them how they were doing. And I mean that. I sincerely mean that, because, you know, I see that sign now, and we see anger on the surface, but anger is a secondary emotion. You don't just wake up angry. Something has to spark that anger. And largely in part, everyone that was angry was more so fearful. And when I think about that woman, I look past the sign, and I see the fear, and I understand that fear. Because maybe they weren't fearful of, you know, getting COVID. They were fearful of, you know, not making any money, not being able to pay bills. How are they going to put food on the table? Well, everyone was scared. So I think about that woman, and I just want to know how she's doing.
An absolute pleasure, as always, to hear from Madison Thorne. I'm sort of lost for choice making pictures. I mean, look at this. The sun is. Look at this, Neil. You'll have to explain it. I can't see it. I'm behind the podcast. Oh, I see. Well, look, I'll explain it for you. Let me put you in my pocket so I can make a picture and tell you what I'm seeing. It's the sunshine is really bursting through the trees behind me, and I'm on a road, a deep cut road that I'll make a picture of as well, so that you can see that on the show page, where cars are making themselves their way rather up and down this mountain. But it's lined by trees on either side, and the sun is just striking Is it a fir? Neil, everything looks like a fir in Norway land. I know. Is it a pine? Oh, it could well be a pine. Don't say anything, Neil. You'll let yourself down on your tree identification, which you're going to night school for. Right, well, this one is beautifully bathing, just being kissed by the sunshine from across the road, and it nicely separates it from everything else around it. F4, shutter speed 1600, ISO 160. Let's get that picture before the sun goes behind that cloud that's approaching. One more of those. Wonderful. Oh, it's lovely. Hear the peace and quiet as well. Right, let's rescue you from my pocket. Right, it's time to hear part one of my conversation this week with Joel Meyerowitz. An interview I think that became, I think it became more of a chat, actually. And for instance, there was a particular picture that I've always wanted to ask him about. So even though I'd noted it down, and I hadn't necessarily intended in a structured interview to mention the particular picture, but in the end I did, and I'm looking forward to having more conversations with him about other pictures too in the future. But let's start at the beginning, as they say. I'm delighted to bring you one of the most talked about, the most loved, the most respected, the most revered street, landscape and portrait photographers, a pioneer of colour photography. And I think a very passionate conversation on all levels today. This is Joel Meyerowitz. I know it's a well-documented story, but speaking as somebody, Joel, who owes a debt of complete and unconditional gratitude to my father for his belief and inspiration and the fact that he seemed to read the world with an air of inquisition, though he wasn't a photographer. You have very much the same story. You say you learned the art of quiet observation from your father, but I wonder how. My
father was a real street guy. He grew up in Harlem, born in 1908, a real, sort of rugged, individualist, street smart guy. Got to survive, came from a big European family, although he was born in America. And he always lived on the streets. He was a salesman when I was a little kid, and I would often go with him on his rounds around New York. His modus operandi was not to go into a store and ask for an order. He would go in and hang out with guys. And he was very funny, quick to humor, quick on his feet, quick with his hands. And so he kind of just talked to people. And usually the conversations were animated and funny. And afterwards, they would just give him the order. He wouldn't have to ask for it. And I once, said to him, "Hey, Pop, you forgot to ask the guy for the order." And he said, "He knows why I'm here. My job is just to go in and have a good time and enjoy myself. And when I leave, he'll tell me what he needs." He said, "I don't have to ask." And so I watched the way he managed those work and life situations with a kind of good sense of humor and playful spirit and good cheer. And on the street, my father would talk to anybody. He'd always say hi to people, or he'd make a comment about something they wore or whatever. And on the block that we lived on in the Bronx, which was sort of, I wouldn't say a ghetto, but it was really working class down at the bottom, real blue collar. Yeah. My father was considered the mayor of the block because he was talkative that way. He was also quick with his hands because he was the first Golden Gloves champion, which was a boxing thing of 1929. Imagine that. Yeah. On the eve of the Depression, they had a boxing. They invented this boxing thing, and he won the first time. So he was sort of treated with a kind of respect on the street. And as his kid, the first of his kids, I could see the way people responded to him. And I watched him often point things out to me, like, keep an eye on this, Joel. Watch what's going to happen here. And things would happen. And I grew up kind of wondering how he knew I mean, how could he predict that they would have this engagement, or a fight would break out, or something funny would happen, or somebody would slip on a banana peel, that kind of pratfall. And I think it was just a kind of alert sensibility growing up on the streets of Harlem, where he had to take care of himself from an early age, that gave him this insight. And, as a child, I received this information from him, but each of us processes the information we learn from our parents or from the world around us in our own way. He certainly wasn't trying to make me a visual artist. No. He was just teaching me or showing me human behavior in all of its glories and foolishness and humor, the rich potential of it. And for some reason, that went into whatever available space within me that could misread his guidance and make something personal out of it for myself, which I think is what all artists do. I think they misread the information that they take in through books or artworks or observation and mold it to our own necessity.
You went on a road trip with your dad and your son. A very unique bonding experience, the three of you. Must have been fascinating conversation.
Well, it was. And he was the ultimate unreliable narrator. He was in the midst of an Alzheimer's development, which is why we went on the road trip.
That was the reason, yeah.
I wanted to get him out of assisted living in Florida, which was really a horrible situation. On the surface, they all sound like they're country clubs. Yeah. But in reality, these assisted living places, at least in America, if any person is slightly lively or, out of order in their terms, because they've got good and high spirits, they narcotize them with drugs. And to see my lively father numb and dull was so outrageous to me that I decided to take him out of there, get him off the drugs, and take him on a road trip and make a movie, because I wanted to share the Alzheimer's experience with everybody, thinking his three sons, my brothers Rick and Steve, if we couldn't see what was happening to him, because my mother was kind of hiding it, then how many other families were there in America or the world where people didn't recognize what was going on, or they already started to put that person in, kind of out, to get them out of the world and sort of put them in a corner somewhere. And I felt that I needed to see this firsthand so that we could all learn about what the possibilities and potential for Alzheimer's people was about having a life and being loved by family. And so I thought the road trip was a great outing, getting him away from routines and having his son and his grandson take care of him. And I got to tell you, I don't know if you've seen the film. It's on my website where it's easily seen. But he still had that kind of mayor of the block attitude. He would talk to anybody. He just couldn't quite remember 5 minutes later what was going on. But his generosity of spirit and his desire to connect was still robust.
Yeah. Well, I think that generosity of spirit is obviously alive and working very well in you. And we'll come back to your mentoring shortly. Painting was your muse, but your own photographic epiphany came through the one and only Robert Frank, which is not a bad place for it to come from, is it?
What a jolt!
I know.
know? I mean, if we all have the responsibility of being awakened to our potential. And it doesn't always come from inside. Sometimes somebody outside puts the key in your lock and just turns it enough for you to catch a glimpse of possibility, which was all that happened. Yeah. I wasn't a photographer. I wasn't interested in photography. I had no camera. I was still a painter and a graphic designer and working in a small agency. And I designed this booklet, and Robert was the hired photographer. I had no idea he was Robert Frank, Yeah. But he was a friend of my boss's. And so Harry, my boss, said, just go down and make sure he gets all the pictures for the booklet. I went there. He paid me no mind whatsoever, Robert. But watching him work And really, even more than watching him work, hearing the click of the Leica and seeing the action in front of him when the click happened was an epiphany. Because I was looking over his shoulder the whole time, was behind him, off to the side, but I could see these gestures appearing in front of him that either happened spontaneously or that he motivated by a few soft words. There were two young girls he was photographing. But it was as if every moment that had a peak, he made a picture of it. And I didn't understand it until I saw it repeated again and again, the high point. Because as a painter, when I had been in art school and we were doing life drawing and everything, I was always looking for the gesture on the model's part that released some recognition, even without words, but something that became visually dynamic in some way. So I probably had some carryover of that. In any event, watching him for a couple of hours really was stimulating. And when I left the shoot to go out on the street and go back to the office, suddenly the street was alive in a way it had never been before. I saw every gesture as potential for meaning. Every interaction between strangers who weren't coming together to do anything together, but were in the same space together. And it was as if the space suddenly had a knot in it, that it became visible. You know, that's what it was.
And did you know at that moment that this was it then? You say epiphany, but was this the moment where you said to yourself, well, Joel, I can't think of anything else I'd rather do with the rest of my life?
Well, I didn't think about the entirety of the future, but I knew, I would have taken a bus back to the agency because it was only about 30 blocks away. Instead, I walked back to the agency, and block after block, crowd after crowd, incident after incident began piling up. And by the time I got to 53rd and 5th Avenue, where the building was, I knew that I had to quit my job, get a camera, and go out on the street. Beyond that, I knew nothing. I just had this fulfillment, this instinct of like a heat inside of me that said, don't spend any more time in an office. Be on the street. And I got back to the office and I went in to see Harry, and he said, well, how was the shoot and everything? I said, it was great, Harry. I'm quitting on Friday. and this guy looked at me and it was like, was it so bad? Are you afraid you're going to get fired? I said, no, it was a miracle. I saw things that I didn't know I needed to be part of. And so I want to go out on the street and I want to photograph street life.
You're so important to many photographers who followed your work, been inspired by your work and your ethics and your philosophy. And they've become street observers because of you and what they see. There's never been a time where you can see quite so much photography of the street, of course, has there?
I think there's an abundance of it now that has been released by smartphones and the ease of making photographs with a digital device and then seeing it on screen relatively quickly, both on the street and the back of the camera or coming back to their computer. And I think that people's appetite has increased worldwide. The photography is the universal language now. We used to think music was, and certainly it maintains that. But in the past, you used to have to buy a camera. If you wanted to take pictures, you had to buy a camera and walk around with it, have film in your pocket, be prepared to spend on the film, spend on the processing, and then do something with it. And that narrowed the field to those passionate amateurs or people who wanted to do that. And carrying a camera was a slight burden at the time, given the scope of them. But nowadays, the facility of the smartphone has bred a new kind of desire. And I think this has opened up the world to photographers being at ease in going out into the world, making pictures. I think what's still difficult for most people is learning how to recognize their own identity I think there's a lot of mimicry that goes on because there's such an abundance of imagery on the internet. People look at it and say, oh, I want to make pictures like that. And so I think mimicry is a leveler that sort of flattened a lot of photography. But people poke up. Yeah. They get that inner line of understanding, and they rise to the occasion and begin to find their identity. And certainly that's where I feel the mentoring that I might offer is to support that kind of search for your own identity.
Legacy of one's work being so important. There's so much in the decades of your work we could talk of. We'd be here all day, Joel. And I know you've got a busy day of shooting in the beautiful part of the world that you live in, I'm sure. But a street photographer in London called Nick Turpin spoke to me about a particular photograph of yours, which we featured on the show a while back, The Fallen Man in Paris, as being pivotal to his own career. And I would imagine it's a fairly familiar story. It's a picture of drama, the sadness of humanity, the busyness of a city street, and the happenstance, which is a favourite word of mine at the moment, that I think frequents a street photographer's life. Can you describe that moment and what went through your mind as you saw it unfolding?
Well, it's written deeply in my memory because of the simple fact of what happened visually, of someone having a collapse on a sidewalk right by a metro station and a bus stop, and people just standing there doing nothing. And then at the very moment that I arrived, a workman with a hammer is coming around the edge of the metro station, and his hand is on that beautiful Art Nouveau pillar where there's usually a street lamp or something. And the guy is stepping over the fallen man with the hammer raised in his hand. He's just stepping over him like he's refuse in the street. Nobody is bending over to help this person. And, a week or two ago, there was a big story in the news about a Frenchman, a photographer, well-known photographer of flamenco artists in Paris, fell down in the street. A man my age, he's 83 years old. He was. He fell there, nicely dressed and everything. No one came to his assistance for 11 hours. He lay on the street in the cold in Paris, and he died. And the very same thing might have happened to this young man, in there. But the image that I saw, even though the ballet of it was visually and photographically, physically beautiful, the disturbance that nobody went to their aid, that they were all standing there holding their packages and their briefcases and stuff, looking on, was just heart-wrenching to me, and a signal that humanity has really been dehumanized by urban life. And I can tell you that there have been times on the streets of New York City where I have been witness to someone tripping or falling or stepping off a bus and slipping, or their knee collapsing, and I've moved immediately to their aid, to pick them up, to help them to their feet, to ask if I can get something, to call other people over. And New Yorkers generally rise to the occasion with a kind of open-heartedness that is, I think, incredibly affecting to me. And yet I haven't seen that I didn't see that in Paris.
We see moments develop, and you saw this ballet of movement, as you call it. And I've asked this a few times of photographers. And I'll ask it of you, as this developed, when you made that picture, I'm wondering, I'm fascinated to know what happened next in this story, in this famous scene.
I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know. The crowd was pretty much as you see it. They were just standing around.
Yeah.
And the guy with the hammer left. I know many times people say to me, why didn't you do anything? Why didn't you help? And my answer is, I didn't speak a word of French. I wouldn't know what to say or do for this guy. I melted back into the crowd because I felt ineffective. I felt like I wouldn't be of help.
Yeah. Do you think some photographers are luckier or more observant, that they almost magically draw or are drawn to these scenes?
I think it's an issue of discipline.
Right.
If you're not on the street, it's like the tree in the forest, you don't know it falls. If you're not on the street every day, 6-8 hours a day, doing your work, which is paying attention and being present, if you don't do that, then you don't get the images. You have to have that passion that drives you to your limits so that you're out there. That's all there is to it. If you're not out, you won't see the pictures that happen. You'll have missed them all. Yeah. I was lucky because I had Tony at first.
Tony Ray Jones, yeah.
Then I had Gary Winogrand.
Yes.
A few months later, we bumped into each other. And Gary was 10 years older than me, but he was a Bronx guy like I was. And we had caught sight of each other on the street, although we hadn't spoken. But one day we met on the train, on the subway, coming back from the Bronx. We both had gone up to see our mothers. And we were on the same train coming back, and we recognized each other. And, two Bronx Jewish guys, street guys, we started talking, and he said, I'll call you tomorrow morning. We'll go for a walk early. I'll meet you for breakfast at the Greasy Spoon. And that became our habit for the next, I left in the middle of 66, I went away to Europe for a year. So Gary and I worked steadily almost every single day from late 1962 to mid 1966. So that's like 4 years. Yeah. We saw each other every day. And the evenings, my wife and I would go to his place and help him make dinners for his kids 3 nights a week because he was getting divorced. And he couldn't quite handle the kids. So we really we had a life together. And Gary came to Europe to see me in Europe, and we spent some time together. We caught up in America on different trips together. We had a good, I would say, until 68 or 9, when Gary started to move away from New York. We had an incredibly tight friendship. And it was interesting because with a 10-year difference, with me being a brand new baby on the street and Gary being an old hand, it didn't seem to matter. We had a conversational connection and affiliation, a sensibility about New York and being New Yorkers that closed that gap. And it was just friendship. It didn't seem to me or to him either that there were these levels. We were in it together.
I think it was Gary that said it's important sometimes to come back with nothing as it is to come back with everything.
Yeah, there are days when you shoot 6 rolls of film, 8 rolls of film in the course of a day. That's a lot, and you're trying to change your tempo, or you're looking, something's been niggling at you for days that you wanted to pay attention to, but nothing's happening, in that area. It happens at times. And then you look at the contact sheets and you think, oh, I wasn't so asleep after all. I got this. And this becomes the key that opens the next portal to whatever might be a subject that revealed itself by chance, a risk you took by making a leap at something that wasn't well formed yet, just like you're not well formed in the moment, but it indicates a kind of shift. And I think that's part of the gift and the risk of street photography. You don't always get what you want, but you often get something that you didn't know you wanted. And you understand from that point on, this is gritty enough that I can get some traction with it. It's not going to slip away. I'll get this visual traction and begin to push on this a little bit more. So street photography is about not only that discipline of being out there, but of recognizing moments of visualization, of the unexpected, that tell you something that's bigger than yourself, that's out of reach, but you can get a grip and pull yourself up to it. You know, there's something going on in Gary's late work. I mean, there was a book done at his, after his death by Leo Rubinstein, which he put together. He edited a lot of Gary's unedited pictures, the garbage cans full of stuff. But one of the issues that was difficult for me is that I felt that Leo, or that generation, was looking into those pictures for Gary of the past. They wanted Gary from the 60s. That's not what was happening. Gary was in the 80s, and he was dying. He was ill, and he was living in California, where people aren't on the street, where you drive everywhere instead of walking.
Yeah.
And because he was ill, he was driving a lot, and he was shooting things far away. The work is there in the far away stuff. Gary, and I can tell you this because it's true, Gary saw my 8x10 work and bought an 8x10 camera. Not the personality to use it, because it was probably too slow. But he bought that 8x10 camera, and one of the things the 8x10 does, it resolves things far away fantastically, because a sheet of 8x10 film is 36 exposures of 35 millimeter. So the lower right-hand corner of a big picture is a 35 millimeter slide. So a whole sheet of 8x10 is an incredibly rich thing. You can blow up that 8x10, and that little 35 millimeter corner is going to hold exquisite resolution. I think Gary was beginning his own dialogue, and had he lived longer, perhaps, we don't know, but perhaps Gary would have used a large format camera to resolve some of these issues he was discovering in the spaciousness of Los Angeles, which is anything but the crowdedness of New York. I think there was a missed opportunity, and a friend of mine who was a good friend of Gary's, Tom Roma, photographer, he and I have talked about this a few times and have thought maybe we should go in and re-edit that work, looking at Gary as he was then, not as he might have been 20 years before.
You never know where a conversation will lead. And, it was fascinating there, wasn't it, to learn about a true great from a true great. Joel Meyerowitz returns soon. Our conversation actually takes another interesting turn when we talk about his incredibly potent and important Ground Zero project. So here we are in Norway this week, Norway land, for the photo walk. Just you, just me, and some driving snow. Fabulous. I'm going to put these pictures on the show page so that you can see where I was walking. They are, I will just say, sketchbook images. And I know that sounds like I'm making an excuse. Perhaps I am. But some of the pictures that come in where I know that you've taken so long to compose and piece your landscape pictures together. They're beautiful. So me with my X100V, which I love, they don't really come together, or I don't come together with it, minus tripod, that is, to make some of the beautiful scenery pictures that you do. But that's not what this is about. This is about being at one with ourselves, with our cameras, having time to ourselves, and finding some solace, a word which we will come to in a short while. But I have to say that this particular week of photo walks, because I've been making this across the week, instead of one walk, I've split this into several, because it's that cold. I've needed sometimes to come in and warm myself. It's a brilliant workout, skiing. I mean, moderate downhill skiing, I read, burns up to 400 calories per hour, while uphill cross-country skiing burns over 1,000 calories an hour. And I've watched them. The Nordic skiers are just amazing. I mean, they go uphill faster than I come downhill. And I know you think I'm making that up, but I'm not. They are just extraordinary athletes. They really are. It's if you lived in this part of the world, amongst the mountains, put it this way, I don't see anybody that looks in any way, shape or form unfit when I'm out on my walks. So let's go to the mailbag, and then shortly I have something I'd like a little help with for one of our wonderful community, and I'm hoping we can come together a bit on a project that I'm going to reveal. This one's from Richard Simcoe. Hello Neil, hope you're doing well these days. Despite all, I'm in Sydney at the moment, and over here things are not so bad as we start to come out of lockdown. I was saddened by the passing of Tom Stoddart. What a loss. I loved his work, and he seemed to be a genuinely nice soul. And actually, you're right, Richard, he was a genuinely nice soul. A very generous character. Somebody who I don't know, he just thought about other people ahead of himself, it seemed. In his career, in his mentoring. It wasn't about him. It was about whoever he met, it seemed to me, when you spoke with Tom. So, as Richard says, I'm convinced that photojournalism still matters, and losing a person who excelled at it leaves a void that's going to be hard to fill. May he rest in peace. Definitely amen to that. I have a non-photo related question. Oh, stand by. Do we do non-photo related questions? Of course we do. A year ago, I made a documentary movie. The movie was not funded, and I found myself looking for a voiceover artist. Due to the lack of funding, I found one on Fiverr for a reasonable price. And before anybody says, don't go looking on Fiverr, it's not a bad place to find skilled individuals. And for many people, it's a fantastic place to leap from with all sorts of new careers, filmmaking, voiceover, photography. Unfortunately, that person didn't deliver, and pushed by the time I had to do the voiceover myself. It was horrible. The experience of recording it, as well as the result. I wasn't able to read a single sentence during recording in one go. I must have done 50 plus takes for everything. I do have a very strong Slovakian accent, as that's my home country. I thought, Werner Herzog can do it, why not me? What was I thinking? Any pointers, suggestions on voiceovers would be appreciated, so next time I can improve. I guess some voices are just not suitable for this kind of work. Here's how bad it sounded, and Richard sent me the YouTube film, which I watched this morning with a cup of coffee, devoid of Garibaldis. This is a country that doesn't sell Garibaldis. Shock horror. The film is absolutely brilliant. What a fascinating story. I will put it on the show page today so you can go and look at it yourself, but let me describe what it is. And Richard, I take my hat off to you. You are a much braver man than me. It's a story about a tall ship which is called Europa. It's quite a famous tall ship, actually. And it found itself in 2020 portless at the start of COVID. Do you remember that time when ships were being told, you can't come to port, nobody can get off, and all these ships were stranded out at sea in various parts of the world? And Europa was one of those ships, but this is a tall ship. It's not really used to housing people on it for months on end when it's not going anywhere. So the crew made this decision that they would have to set sail because they couldn't go on land. Nobody wanted them there, and the only base that would have them back, the only port that would have them back, was their home port, which was 10,000 nautical miles away. And Richard made this incredible documentary about this 10,000 nautical miles journey that he made back with a crew from Antarctica was it Antarctica? I think so, to Europe. It's a long way. They set out, actually, watching the start of the film, I thought, well, you've all set out. Some of them were wearing masks, and it was at the time when we had no idea of, well, we had some sort of idea, didn't we, of just how potent this virus was, and they were all on this boat together, and you get this idea that they're going to be at sea in the middle of the ocean, and if one or two of them have got it, they're nowhere near any hospital or any kind of salvation, if you like, from dealing with this virus that we knew nothing about. So they set off and they go across the sea, and the story, I won't tell you the rest now, you can watch the rest. Richard's incredible documentary, and yes, it has his voice on it. 10 minutes in, by the way, the storms start. It looks hideous, it looks horrible. But your voiceover, right. Yes, you did make a voiceover. And Well, it's a first-person story, so actually it makes perfect sense that it's you. And I can feel the experience, certainly through your words. But if I were to make a few pointers, and this would be for those that are thinking, well, I'd like to make a documentary. Sound is being used more when people are making films, and the photo films that we talk about as well. So I just jotted down a few things that perhaps, Richard, I may have done. First of all, mark your script. And what I mean by that is that you effectively dance with the words, you underline words, you put hats on words, you put, well, whatever accents that you can sort of imagine in your mind mean an up intonation or a down intonation or a pause or a pregnant pause, all sorts of things like that. Just mark your script out, because I did feel that you went at it at one particular pace. And if you'd have marked your script, maybe it would have had, maybe there would have been a bit more light and shade to the read. Have a drink of water standing by. Avoid tea and coffee. Anything that can make your voice a little gluey. Warmth is very important. Never try to record voiceovers in the cold, he says, standing in Norway whilst it's snowing. It's much harder in the cold to let your voice catch up with your thoughts. I got this feeling, you might now write to me and say, no, I wasn't, but I got this feeling by listening to you that you were probably sat down. And I think if you're starting making voiceovers, stand up, because that gives you a little bit more energy within your presentation. If you make a mistake, you said you made, 50 plus takes each time, don't worry, just stop, start again, and try and remember the last word that you were on so that you can pick up in the edit. Break your script into much, much smaller sections, and then you should be fine. So there we go, a couple of pointers. But Neil, this is a photo podcast. We're telling stories with pictures. But I think that a lot more people are starting to make films, and I promise you, go and look at Richard's film, and you may feel inspired to make your own. And well, if all else fails, Richard, just win the lotto, and you can hire somebody like Morgan Freeman. You mentioned our dear Tom Stoddart, and you know what we like to do on this show. And for those that are new to the programme, because you've come this week to listen to Joel, we like to take a break every now and then between the letters and take some inspiration from former guests. And this is the British photojournalist, the late British photojournalist, Tom Stoddart. Let's take a moment to be inspired by him.
I think ideas are the currency of how we exist as professional photographers, because, I mean, that and the insatiable quest for news and needing to know what's going on anywhere in the world at any given time. You know, I try hard to go on everything that is major in the world, and if I only get one frame that's worthwhile, it's been worthwhile going. Part of our remit as photojournalists is to remind people that, not everyone has access to electricity, not everyone has access to medicine, clean water, human rights. So if you're going to do this job seriously, you have to be aware that you might go halfway around the world and shoot for a period of time and come back, and hardly anyone will be interested in the photographs. I don't think you're aware at the time. I'm a great kind of believer that, and I tell young photographers this all the time, that they're not shooting for the next day or the next week or the next month. They're shooting for the next 20 years, 25 years, especially if they're on an important event. As I say, I've been around, this is my 46th year as a professional, and it's amazing how many times photographs I shot 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I mean, the Berlin Wall is a point in case. I happened to be, by chance, by luck, on the Berlin Wall the night it opened. I was at Checkpoint Charlie when the very first people came through. And it seems like yesterday, and in fact it was November the 9th, 1989, and the pictures I shot that night are still being used regularly.
The incredible British photojournalist Tom Stoddart, and he is sadly missed by by the entire industry. I know many of my friends that, friends that I have and friends that I've made since starting this podcast talk very affectionately still of Tom Stoddart, and long may that be the case. To the letters then, one from our Camille, who I know we've featured of late. And hold on, we've got to open up the complaints department. There's a complaint coming in. I feel I should have some sort of warning sound, some sort of klaxon, or maybe cue the Monty Python Dead Parrot sketch, one of my favourite sketches ever. I wish to register a complaint. You can go and look that one up. Dear Neil, bad news. I've had to stop listening to the show. What? Reasons. Oh, you've listed them? A roller coaster of emotions, if I were to be honest. Getting choked... Oh, he's done it as a checklist. Okay. Getting choked up. Check. Stories like the one from Nikki Heppenstall. What a story. What a brave lady. With a tear in my eye, I bow to her, and I'll pop that on the show page so you can hear that episode. And I can't have a tear in my eye, Neil. I've got long hair, tattoos all over, and an angry face, I'm told. Water in my eyes ruins all that. I can't be seen that way. The Nils story. Oh yes, a fellow Belgium lander. How can you not get touched by that story? On the other hand, how can I ever complain again? How can I feel sick and sorry for myself after 3 coughs and a sneeze? How can I complain about muddy roads, paths and steep hills on a walk ever again? The Madison Thorne story and Division Street from Robert Gumpert. Neil, what are you doing to me? Oh, I'm so sorry, Camille. This is not sounding good. Next point, sheer jealousy. Check. Oh no. I wish I could make such beautiful pictures I see on the show page. You sound like me now, Camille. The photographic eye, the skills, the high levels, the way people express themselves through their lenses. Oh, I've just got snow has gone all the way down my back. Oh, that's cold. Oof. Sorry, Camille. Back to your complaints. I'm jealous. Getting birds on a picture is peanuts compared to those. Is it? I think the work that you do with your wildlife is really clever. Next point. Oh, is there more? Imposter syndrome flaring up. Check. Inspirational snippets from Simon Baxter and Thomas Heaton and Sean Tucker, Valerie Jardin. He did actually mention Tom Stoddart as well. I feel like such a boring imposter. The next point. Oh, Camille, will it ever end? Photography Daily taking way too much of my time. Check. I know the podcast and the Moor itself are only about 2.5 hours a week, and listening to it on a walk is fine, but after the walk, the show page needs to be revisited. All the links need to be checked. The 360, and. Oh, it's a community I have to engage a bit with to contribute, so I'm finding myself often in the Facebook group that you have, hoping nothing interesting pops up, or off we go, down a rabbit hole. Again, after listening, I have all sorts of ideas and plans for projects, doing black and white work, street photography, try some documentary photo series, portraits, maybe try shooting a wedding, a concert, an event, etc., let alone the skills I'd need for them. I don't have the time and energy for all my wildlife projects. Neil, what have you been doing to me? Oh, Camille, I'm so sorry. Is that all you have for the complaints department? I think that's enough for 1 week, isn't it? But you do, I know amongst your humour there, or I'm hoping it's humour, you make some very solid points about jealousy and envy and imposter syndrome, the emotion, well, in particular, the emotions behind our picture making. I mean, these are facets that we talk about often on this show, but they are the facets, Camille, aren't they, that make us human. And I think that's the great thing about photographing, isn't it? That it brings out your humanity. And whilst you're, I know, being humorous there, it does bring out our humanity. And if we can thrive on an element of curated emotion, I think that can be quite a strong way to drive ourselves. Just don't let those emotions own you sometimes. But they are important. It's all part of, even the imposter syndrome, I believe, is an important lesson for us as we work, and it's a subject that we'll come back to more and more. Anyway, says Camille, I've said my piece. I'm off to do a photo walk with an old episode. Keep walking, keep clicking away, and I'll keep complaining happily. Well, that's good. Thank you also. I mean, my British flinchometer is now registering at number 11, most definitely. You know what I'm like with that flattery, but thank you very much for your very, very, very kind thoughts. In terms of, and I will link to Camille's work. Make sure you go to the show page. There's a lot on it today, including, of course, work from our special guest, who I'm coming to shortly. In terms of community, after the second part of Joel Meyerowitz, I do have that something that you may be able to help me out with. Neil, you're teasing. Just tell us. No. I want to leave it to the end of the show, if that's okay with you. Let's return then to the godfather of modern colour photography, as he's known. And I want to start with a project that I think I gave a nod to, really, in the first half. While we're making our pictures, we're essentially piecing together an incredible archive that could be the launch of many side stories that become projects in and of themselves. And Joel will make it much clearer in a moment what I'm talking about here. And then our conversation, well, it turns to his incredibly important Ground Zero work, and he takes no prisoners, as you're about to hear. Let's return to Joel Meyerowitz, and I'm going to go and make myself a little bit warmer with a coffee and listen along with you. In terms of discovery, Wild Flowers, I suppose, is a perfect example of that, where you looked into your work and thought, hold on, there's something going on here that I didn't realize was happening.
Yes, well, photographers are really collectors of moments.
Yeah.
You know, like some people collect antiques or junk-tiques or, first edition books or whatever. I mean, people collect. Photographers are collecting sensations that happen so instantaneously that they're gone almost as soon as they appear. And the camera is the perfect instrument for snatching a thousandth of a second out of reality and holding on to it. So we collect all kinds of moments. But how do you sort them? We're lucky today with keywording and Lightroom or databases or things like that, because you can put in something. You can type in Cadillac, which I did this morning for something. I typed in Cadillac, and up came like 65 photographs of Cadillacs. Who the hell knew that I had that many Cadillac pictures? But, they appear in pictures, either on purpose or marginally. And when I keyword, I note, it's a Cadillac. But when you look at 65 pictures of Cadillacs, suddenly there's a body of work interesting enough to consider, maybe I've got something to go with here. And that's what happened with Wild Flowers. It happened on an editing table, Lightbox, where I was going through a shoot that I had done commercially, because in those days, that was the only way to survive and support yourself. Everybody did it. Robert Frank shot commercial that's how I met him. Gary shot liquor ads and airplane ads, and Lee Friedlander shot record covers, and Diane Arbus shot, fashion. Bill Klein, shooting fashion. Anyway, I was editing this take, and there were a couple of pictures that didn't belong in that take that I made while I was doing the job that were sort of offsides. And I sort of took them out of the pile, but put them together because they had in them some kind of flower thing. Not pretty flowers, but a funny flower thing. Anyway, I had a handful of them up there. And then I thought, I know I've got other pictures with flowers. So I started going through my files, slides, just looking. And sure enough, after a couple of days, I had hundreds of pictures. And I thought, I have been photographing funny flower incidents without even knowing it.
I know.
And it's that kind of a wake up that is so delicious in the world of photography, because we're making pictures in a fraction of a second. If we were artists, painters, working on a painting for weeks, trying to resolve something, your output is less, and you actually stay in connection to what you're doing throughout the process. But photography, you're constantly flipping the page, in a sense. You're just pressing the button and keep on going. So in order to recover those things, you need a clue. And frankly, I'll make an aside here. At this point in my life, I'll be 84 in 10 days. I have the time being here to review all that work that never got out there. Because in the 60s and 70s, no one gave a shit about photography. It was a craft. It wasn't really a legitimized art form. They were just beginning to take it seriously. You couldn't even make a living, really, selling your work. There was no chance for a lot of that youthful work to go out into the world. So now at the other end of the arc, I have the time on my hands to go back and look at this work. We just scanned 140,000 Kodachromes in the studio, and now we're scanning 70,000 black and white negatives, many of which have never seen the light of day. So I have an opportunity to reconsider, from the vantage point of age, the effervescence of youth, the volatility, the variety, the challenges, the intuition that brought me to make certain kinds of pictures and do it repeatedly, but which never got a chance to see daylight. So in a way, I have a chance now to rediscover who I was as a young artist from the point of view of the older man now.
I'm thinking that the title of this book, you heard it here first, could be Daylight, couldn't it? These pictures seeing daylight for the first time.
Seeing daylight.
Yeah. There we go.
Lovely, witty title.
Yeah.
Really, thank you.
Write that one down.
Thank you. You're not kidding. I'm writing it down.
He's actually writing it.
Now.
Seeing Daylight. Well, if that's the next book, I will be immeasurably proud to have been just a small slither of it. You said the words, though, not me.
Well, but you recognized the moment title for
there we go.
The word.
I'm letting you write it. I'm not interrupting.
Okay, there you go. It's written.
It's written. It's written.
It's written. No, it's a beautiful...
Yeah.
Well, because they've been hidden away in the dark. It's perfect.
Amazing. I want to change the tone quite dramatically, actually. I would imagine many people think of 9/11 and the documentation of it as a story, as well, comprehensively and meticulously studied through the lenses of so many photographers and so many important photographers. And indeed, on the day of this seismic world event, it was. What isn't perhaps so known is that following that dreadful day, it became harder to photograph and document Ground Zero because it was declared this crime scene by Rudy Giuliani. But you gained access and built a historically vital archive. And I wonder how.
New York smarts. No, really, it's a kind of chutzpah. You know the expression chutzpah?
Mm.
It's a Yiddish expression. New Yorkers use it all the time. It's like having balls. You want to do something, you got to have the balls to do it. You got to figure it out. You can't just say, oh, I want to do this, and you expect someone to come with a magic wand and tap you on the head. Okay, now you can do it. I had to figure out how I can get in there. A cop told me, no photographs, buddy, this is a crime scene. And when I heard that, and I argued with her, and I said, what about the press? And she pointed and said, there's the press. They're not going in either. I thought, if the press is not going in, there's not going to be a record. How could Giuliani, that fascist fucker, do that to the people of New York? And so I decided that's my job. I'm going to do that. I'm going to figure out how to get in there.
Yeah.
And so I worked, the streets. I started to think who I knew, what could I do, blah, blah. And finally I remembered, Adrian Benepe. He was the commissioner of Manhattan's parks, and his father was a good friend of mine, and his father had founded the green market system of New York. All the outdoor markets of New York were conceived of by his dad, who really made a great and effective offering to the people of New York. Just like I go to the green markets in London when I'm there. And so I called Adrian, who I knew since he was a little kid. He said, you're a straight arrow. I know you. I'll get you a Parks Department badge tomorrow. You go in, but we have nothing to do with you after you go in. You're on your own. So sure enough, he gave me the little badge, and I immediately scanned it and printed it out in all the colors because they were New York City and all of its stupidity.
Yeah.
It printed the badges on construction paper that kids use in school, you know, pink, blue, red, green, yellow, magenta.
Yeah.
They printed it on the cheapest paper you could find, available anywhere. I bought one. I bought a pack of paper and I made my own badges. I went down there. This Smokey, you know, a ranger, drove me in a little 3-wheeled vehicle. He dumped me in the middle of ground zero and said, "Good luck, bye." And there I was standing there with my view camera on my shoulder, my 35 millimeter bag of, you know, holders for the film, rolls of film in my pocket. And I look around and I see everybody's wearing boots, hard hats, masks, gloves. And I thought, oh shit, I better get a hard hat. And I see on a plywood wall that had been erected, I see a hard hat hanging. Nobody around. I go over, I pick up the hard hat.
Don't tell me you lifted it.
I lifted it and put it on my head.
Right.
And the thing about it was so great. On the front, it said NYPD.
Oh.
And on the back was an American flag. And I thought, got my first bit of equipment. Then I went over and I got myself a respirator and a pair of gloves. And there was a place where they were giving out boots, and I put on boots. And then I got, you know, a reflecting vest. And within a few minutes, I looked like everybody else.
And then you spent 9 months there, didn't you? Best part of 9 months, I think. Thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs. I wonder whether you would. I mean, your work is. There's so many important facets to your work, and the books and the pictures and street work. But I wonder whether you might describe this as perhaps your most important work.
Yeah, I think in historical terms, it was one of those necessities that was being obliterated by Giuliani's resistance. And it required someone to go in and give up their life for whatever it took.
Yeah.
9 months in this case. And to do it with a kind of discipline, get up. You know, I was in 12 hours a day, sometimes 14 hours a day. I'd get up 7 o'clock in the morning. I'd be down there. You know, by midnight, I would sometimes be, because they worked 24 hours a day.
Yes, they did, yeah.
There were 3 shifts that came in, so it was working round the clock.
It was.
And so I could be there through 2 shifts, sometimes into 3 shifts. You know, my wife was willing to give me that kind of room to go and do that and not be available on a regular basis. And I just knew it was important, and there was no money to be made from it. I couldn't sell the pictures or publish them. During it, Giuliani had basically put a ban on it. I just built the archive, hoping that someday it would have resonance and value and be useful for historians. And that there'd be a museum to hold it and all of that. So it was a total gamble, and it cost me a lot of money to do it. I didn't work basically for 9 months. I didn't have a job. I'm not a rich guy. I had a studio. I put more people on in the studio. I had 7 people working for me in the studio so that they could process the work and put it into the database and make the files and, you know, keep the organization of it going. I had to mortgage my house. I had to take a business loan. I did get some money at some point from a charity, from a foundation, but I couldn't take the money personally because I wasn't a legitimate recipient of these funds. I had to pass the funds through the Museum of the City of New York, and I never received that money. I mean, this was one of these outrageous interactions that just, you can't believe that it happened.
Well, there's a story I've not read about that and your association with it at all. Life is apparently less frantic than the gift New York provides, but no less photographic. You live in a part of the world with your wife that's become very precious now. Why the beautiful hills and the scenery of Tuscany? I shouldn't need to ask, probably, because it's beautiful. I visited myself. I could see myself living there in that part of the world. But what became your choice?
My wife, Maggie Barrett, was my second wife. I'm her 5th husband.
The most perfect one, I'm sure.
Well, it's lasted longest. It's
There we
lasted 30. We're together 31 years.
Well, there we go. That's perfection.
Anyway, after we met, a few years after we met, we taught a workshop in Tuscany.
Right.
I taught a photography workshop, and she came along after she got her MFA in writing. And in this workshop, we saw that it was poorly run and that people weren't getting their money's worth because of the way it was formed. And we both understood right away, this place, it's only 1 kilometer from where we live now. And it was so beautiful that we thought we could run this workshop ourselves and make a better workshop. And we decided to run a writing and a photography workshop.
Perfect.
In the same location. And we asked the man who's now our best friend here, one of the reasons we live here, we asked Johnny, we'd like to teach a workshop. Do you have a space next year? And he said, take June. So we took June, and June was fantastic. And then we took June for 7 summers until 9/11. And that summer, we had a full workshop. But because I was working in Ground Zero during the lead up to 2000, to the workshop for 2002, I decided that we couldn't do the photography workshop because I didn't know if I was going to still be inside Ground Zero. Yeah. Because the Ground Zero ended on May 31st, and the workshop would have started 2 or 3 days later. So we canceled it, and we never picked it up again. But we kept on coming back here because this place had an impact on our lives, and because we were given a book to do called Inside the Light. It's a book on Tuscany. And we got so deeply involved in the culture here. It's not about the surface. It's the way life is lived in Italy that meant something to us and that we began to perceive. And so we just wanted more of that. And the time came a few years ago to take a risk. Maggie said, let's go to live in Europe for a year and see what happens. You've always wanted to go back after the year you spent with your first wife traveling in Europe in 66 and 67. Now you're with someone you love and who loves you. Why don't you spend a year doing this? And so a year has become 8 years now.
It's a beautiful part of the world to live. Is it true that you trawl the flea markets of the region looking for trinkets of life to observe and photograph?
That part started in France. We had done a book on France too. After the Tuscany book. In 2011 and 12, we did a book on Provence. And at that point, something came up for me about the still life. Part of my evolution in photography is seeing that there's more than one thing. Yeah. Photography has a vocabulary historically that's covered everything: architecture, landscape, portraits, interiors, still lifes, streets, balloon, aerial photographs. I mean, people have figured out ways to photograph. And I had never made still lifes in the same way I had never really made portraits. Yeah. But suddenly it appealed to me because it raised the question. And I started, after photographing Morandi's objects and Cézanne's object, because that's where I discovered my feeling for the object, I decided to see what objects interested me. I've never collected anything. I had too many photographs. I didn't want to collect things, I wasn't a curiosity seeker. But suddenly, I know you can't show this to your listeners, but suddenly stuff looked interesting to me,
Yeah, I can see it.
I mean, what the hell is this thing?
That looks like, is it a cigar box or
it looks to me like it might have held cigarettes or something. But look how complex it is.
It is.
And it has dimensions, and it looks interesting. So I began to see that funny things. It's for holding stamps.
Oh, is it? For holding stamps? Right.
It's got little shells for stamps or whatever else you want to put in it. But these things are objects. I don't know what this is. It's like a hot water bottle or something.
Made out of brass by the looks of it.
Yeah. So I started to ask myself, what is it that I like?
Yeah.
I didn't know what I liked. But by going around French flea markets, I began to think, oh, that's interesting to me. Why do I like that thing that screws into a wall or something? Why do I like this folding? And so I started to pull objects that had lived once and then were sort of discarded. And they turn up in a thrift store or in a junk pile or in a flea market. Yeah. And they have a strange appeal. Everybody is capable of discovering aspects of their sensibility. Let's call it their sensibility, because that's all photography is. It's a sensibility that you feel about where you are or things you see, and you react within your sensibility by saying, ooh, and you raise the camera and you make a photograph of the thing that called out to your sensibility. And by doing this again and again, you define yourself, or you identify who you are to yourself. And that's the story of photography. These pictures are all about you, yourself. They look like the world. The world is just the place that the pictures live in and are invisible in until you recognize them. Most people think photography is a whole different idea, but really, if you're curious about who you are and your own identity, you're going to figure out, how do I express that? And to me, that is the secret of photography that's in plain sight for everyone. But not everybody understands it that way. They think it's an object that you've got to copy with a camera. They turn the moment into a concrete object of something. They identify it and they put it in the middle of the frame. That's, I think, one of the great drawbacks of contemporary image making today, using the smartphone and the digital camera, is people use the bullseye approach. Ooh, I got it. It's in the middle. I got it. But let's face that. That's dumb show. That's like trying to shoot the arrow into the target. The frame itself is what needs to be filled, not the middle. Frame is a dynamic proportion, which is the classic ideal 2x3. It's the golden mean, as Cartier-Bresson would say. And so you have a geometric proportion that is exquisitely poised to hold information. You just have to make it interesting when you put it in the frame. That's your responsibility. Make it interesting.
The godfather of modern colour photography, Joel. It's a title attributed to you in books, online, in interviews. You've observed the world and you now teach and mentor. You're now pointing out life, as you have just a moment ago. Its flaws and the mystery and the wonder, doing for others what your father did for you, which we have kind of come full circle in our conversation, really, and it must make you immeasurably proud.
Well, it does. Actually, I haven't thought of it like that, but when you put it in those terms, all of us want to be successful at what we do. And success is too often measured by financial success. But the success within yourself of doing something that gives you pleasure and educates you, to me, that is the goal, is to understand something about yourself in the world you live in through a medium that you are connected to, through some passion, through some big effort to understand it. And if along the way you begin to have glimpses of yourself reflected by the medium, and you're in a position to share them with other people, that's a measure of success that is only on the personal and interpersonal level. It's about the energy that you've absorbed from the world and you transmit back out, because we are all transmitters. You, Neo, by doing what you're doing, conveying our conversation to people who want to hear it from you, are a transmitter. And you're doing this from your own passion, your own curiosity, and you do it eloquently. I have to say your questions, the organization of your thoughts, the arc of our conversation has been carefully crafted by you so that we arrive here where we began in some way. in a very easy, relaxed manner, we've actually had a real conversation about things, that interest both of us and hopefully your listeners.
And my sincere thanks to our guest, Joel Meyerowitz, this week. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with Joel. And it's not the last you will hear from him on this show. I can promise you that. In fact, he's back in a couple of weeks to talk about a book. And then hopefully after that to do some other bits and bobs. Plus, I'm meeting up with him, I sincerely hope. There's lots of hopes here in London very soon as well. Send your stories in. You've been hearing them today between the interview with Joel to the studio address. It's studio@photographydaily.show, studio@photographydaily.show. This entire thing is built around your stories and your experiences and what photography means to you, what mental health benefits it brings to you. We talk so much about that on this show, and it's something that's sincerely very precious to me. So also send your stories in, your photo stories, to that same email address, studio@photographydaily.show, because I'd love to see where you've been walking, warm or cold. Send me your pictures. Those stories about where you live. It's I sometimes say it's like a sort of geographic diary. It really is when I receive those letters, those emails, those pictures from you. But you don't have to have the pictures. If it's simply some thoughts that you wish to share, that's fantastic as well. Now, I have been saying during the show that I wanted to tell you about a very special exhibition, or at least I want to see if you could possibly help me with this exhibition for Hannah Gimblett. Now, Hannah is somebody that you'll be familiar with, is a name certainly that you'll be familiar with if you listen to this show. She's in our private Facebook group, and if you haven't joined yet, it's a fantastic and safe place to be to talk about all things picture making. There's no point scoring in that group at all. We talk about solace in this show, don't we? Solace is a word that I often use for describing the picture-making process. And for Hannah, photography is a true solace, as in recent years, a series of chronic health issues have led her to being bedbound at such an early stage of her life. She was photographing, making fantastic pictures, and hopefully one day again will, but of music and portrait pictures. Though this had to change, and in spite of the health issues, she's built up and she's building up a love of botanical picture making. And Hannah's very keen to do an exhibition. I'll tell you where it's going to take place in a moment, and is looking for somebody to print the work that she's producing, these 12/16 prints, on Hannah Millay paper or Klein rag. There are going to be 12 12/16s. So we're looking, I suppose, either for somebody who says, "Oh, Neil, I am your printer for that one," or we're looking for a possible sponsor, which I will join in with, because I'm happy to go halves in with this. If we can find a sponsor on this show, I certainly am. Let me tell you where it's going to be taking place, because it is a UK exhibition. It's going to be at Heavy Tree Park, which is a community hub in a beautiful part of the world called Exeter, or Exeterland, of course, as we know it on this show. It's a hub that has taken 10 years of planning, and it finally came together during lockdown. And for Hannah, this place, this gallery opportunity that she's been offered represents a real chance to show her new emergence, to feel part of a wider opportunity, wider community, or if you like, on the outside once more. So if you can help us with this project, and I sincerely hope you can, and there may be different ways that you feel I haven't explained, that you think, "Neil, have you thought about this? Maybe you could suggest that to Hannah," then please email me. The studio address is, as it was only a few moments ago, studio@photographydaily.show, studio@photographydaily.show. You won't mind if I mention that a few times in the coming weeks, will you? No, Neil, I won't. Good. And, well, that's it for this week. Quite the week, I think you'll agree. And thank you, as ever, for your letters. We always end the week musically, or end the show musically, don't we? Something to continue your walk by, so you can carry on making pictures while one of our curated Photowalk songs passes by your ears. And today, well, the news is a bit challenging at the moment, isn't it? I look at it with a slightly heavier heart right now. So I wanted to find something that I think spoke emotionally and actually felt right while I was walking through these incredible scenes here in Norway land. So I've chosen This Life of Time by Bayo.
It's all in our hands, this life of time that's given to us all. It gathers round each night, each morn. We watch it pass and grow. It is all in our hands, it is all in our hands. With every field and rising sea, can hear the sounds of all, and with every change we'll always be not lost but found. It is all in our hands, it is all in our
Fantastic song, This Life of Time by Bayo. And my thanks to our guest this week, Joel Meyerowitz, and of course the inspirational voices belonging to Tom Stoddart and Helen Jones Florio and Madison Thorne. My thanks also to our wonderful, glorious, amazing, brilliant, incredible patrons who without, well, we wouldn't have a show. You really do grease the wheels of this podcast, keep us, quite frankly and literally, on the road, and who as a community are helping to build this show as we move ahead. And of course, for patrons, we have the monthly Zoom meeting, which is coming up very, very soon, of course. And we have the More episode of a Saturday, or sometimes a Sunday, on those weeks where we are slightly more travelled. And this week, well, being on the road means that I've not done my regular studio diary piece. It's more a collection of thoughts as I've been walking through this incredible, very cold woodland close to the cabin where I've been staying in Norway land. We'll be talking about gratitude, and I also have some thoughts about some interesting podcasting changes and things afoot. Good things, all good things. So that's the More Show tomorrow. Oh, and also we have 5 Things I Love About Photography, our featuring patrons. And tomorrow is the voice of Mike Miller. So that's the More Show tomorrow. Next week we're in, well, I wouldn't say sunnier climes, but probably slightly warmer climes as I return back to old Blighty land. Music on the show from the wondrously tuneful artlist.io, and I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you and talking with you next time. We're hours from our flight home, and there's one job left: to take these ski boots off. Honestly, my mother-in-law is absolutely right when she says about swimming, there's only one thing that makes swimming less enjoyable than it otherwise could be, and that's the water. If it wasn't for the faffing about with the water, it would be far more fun. Skiing, it's all down to the boots. If it wasn't for the boots, and I sound like I'm worn out because I've just taken one boot off, it would be far more fun. Right, last boot off. Here we go. One last one. There we go. Pull the lip forward, and the shoe, or rather the foot, just doesn't want to come out. Go on. Oh, get off. Oh, that is bliss.
Photography Daily is a Loading Zone production.